So what we've just talked about is essentially when sleep goes really well, when you're getting the perfect amounts of sleep, what your typical expected sleep patterns should look like. When you are deprived of sleep, it can lead to a number of consequences or changes, or symptoms even. So what we classify sleep deprivation is you've got inadequate quality or quantity. So quantity, maybe, when you get sleep, the sleep is great, but you're just not getting enough of it. Or maybe you're getting enough sleep, but you're not getting much deep sleep. You're waking up frequently. Yeah, that's the idea there. So in the study design, we specify this to partial sleep deprivation because obviously you can be sleep deprived for like a week or something like that, or I don't know, however long you can go without sleeping. But partial sleep deprivation is when we're thinking about, you're getting sleep every night, but maybe you're just sleeping a little bit less than you should be. So that's that idea of partial sleep deprivation. You're not being totally sleep deprived for 3 days. Okay. So that's kind of what we've just explained there. So the categories that you think about in terms of effects of sleep deprivation, you're thinking of your ABCs. So your affective, behavioral, and cognitive. So affective as in your emotions, behavioral behavior, cognitive, your kind of mental thinking. Okay, so your affective functioning. So when you are sleep deprived, I'm sure you guys are all very aware, you can get a little bit more sensitive. You might be a little bit more easy to anger or easy to get sad. It's just this idea that you basically have less emotional control. Sometimes we think of this being linked particularly to REM sleep, but it's not a very, big thing. Like, you just get not enough sleep, you're going to have not issues, but you might find yourself getting a little bit more emotional or more, expressive than you usually are. So very quick to become emotional, the exaggerated responses as well, and kind of this sort of struggle to control your emotions. And that's, lots of personal emotional stuff, but also in terms of interpreting other people's emotions, that can be affected as well. And I guess that ties into sort of cognitive functioning and that sort of thing. But it's this idea that you may, could misinterpret someone else's emotions and then you respond in a way that isn't emotionally appropriate as well. So it's just this idea of you have lots of affective effects, basically. So you would, in describing this in a question, you might say, more easy to anger or more irritable, like generally in a bad mood, hard to control emotions. You can just describe things like that. Because I may ask you, what are two effective effects? I don't think of another word than effects, but, two effective consequences of partial sleep deprivation. And then you could say something like, more easily irritable and trouble judging other people's emotions, something like that. Okay, so in terms of behavior, and again, as I say this, it's very important to know which ones are affective, which are behavioral, which are cognitive, because VCA can very easily ask you what are some cognitive effects of partial sleep deprivation. And if you're not reading the question properly, you might talk about, feelings of grogginess, easy to anger, moody. And it's that idea that you're listing off, your A's and your B's, but you haven't read the question specifically enough and like to realize that they're just asking you about cognitive. So it's important that which sort of symptoms or which, effects fit into which category, but also that you're reading the question so you're able to figure out, is VCA asking me, for any effects, or are they asking me specifically for behavioral ones, for example? Okay, so sleep inertia is basically if you're, in like year 10 physics or whatever, when you talk about inertia, it's that idea of, well, you can tell I haven't done physics in a while, like when your body is being still and whatever, the idea that you're, when the bus stops and then you move, that idea, inertia, right? So if you just apply that sort of idea to sleep, you can kind of comprehend what it's saying. Like, when you wake up from sleep, but you sort of internally still feel like you're sleeping, that sort of idea. So you're very groggy, your brain basically hasn't switched on. And often when I talked about, when you wake up naturally, you kind of exit out of REM sleep. If you wake up with an alarm or you wake up, a little bit earlier than your sleep cycle is completed, you might wake up in the middle of your deep sleep, your NREM 3 and 4, And this sort of effect of sleep inertia is likely to be a bit more prominent um, because of this idea that you're in that sort of stage of deep sleep. Um, so feelings of grogginess, slower reaction time, reduced alertness, those are the things that you're wanting to think of there. So excessive sleepiness, I wouldn't write like sleepiness as an effect. I would say things like, slower reaction time, decreased alertness, decreased coordination, um, making more mistakes, stuff like that. Impaired concentration is a little bit more cognitive. I'd say behavioral is sometimes the most tricky one to like make sure that you're thinking of behavioral ones for. Um, I remember my teacher saying this to me. Like, I think our textbook or something listed a behavioral effect as like fatigue or like being tired. I mean, depends on your teacher, depends on the examiner, I guess, but that's pretty wishy washy in my opinion. Like saying like, what's an effect of sleep deprivation? Being tired, like I guess so, but I think I would steer clear of that if you can, and say things like slower reaction time, decreased alertness, um, yeah, making more mistakes, decreased coordination, that sort of thing. Even like slower movements, maybe slower reaction time is probably better. But just think about things to do with behavior. Often in my head, I just like to think of things that involve like moving, because otherwise sometimes I might lean towards like cognitive stuff, like impaired concentration. That's a bit more cognitive in my opinion. Okay, so cognitive functioning, this should kind of be a bit easier to rattle off. So problem solving, your decision making, your memory, your attention, your concentration, all that sort of stuff. As you can imagine, again, as I'm sure you've all experienced, when you've had a bad night's sleep, you just don't really focus that well and everything's a little bit, um, yeah. So that's what you can kind of think of there. Something to be aware of, again, a little bit more of an FYI, but it's just a bit of a thing that you don't generally think of. You think, like intuitively, you think it would be the other way around, that people who are sleep deprived, they tend to actually do quite well on their simple repetitive tasks. Sorry, no, that's the wrong thing. See, literally, I still get confused about it. They do quite poorly on the simple repetitive tasks, but they do relatively well on your complex tasks. I think it's this idea that when you're doing a complex task, you really have to focus, or put in a lot of energy. And when you're sleep deprived, like you can still like, harness all your energy into this one activity. Whereas with your simple repetitive tasks, because it's simple, your body just goes into sort of autopilot mode. But because it's so simple and it just requires a little bit, like just doing things automatically, because your body is in such a state when it's sleep deprived of not doing things well, the simple things that you don't have to use much brain power for are actually done pretty poorly. Whereas, if you've got a complex task, you can kind of just go, oh, okay, I need to actually put any energy that I've got left into this. Hopefully that makes sense. I don't know. It's just a little bit of a, ironic sort of thing. Okay, this is a very nice table. I would memorize at least 3 of each for your exam. So 3 affective, 3 behavioral, 3 cognitive. Again, fatigue is listed in the behavior table. I don't really like it. I'd choose something else. Reduced motor coordination, micro sleeps, reduced reaction time. Maybe those are 3 I'd go for. Impaired behavior control, maybe. With your affective, again, there's a lot of stuff with emotion. So easily irritated, amplified emotional responses, difficulty judging others' emotions. Those are probably some good ones. And then cognitive, they're all pretty good. So memory, inability to focus, poor decision making, problem solving, that sort of thing. But make sure you are able to put them into their categories. Very important. You could even get a multiple choice thing that's talking about so-and-so had a really bad night's sleep. At work, they keep on, I don't know. At school, they keep on dozing off in class or like, paying attention out the window. What is this an example of? It would be cognitive, that idea of not being able to maintain focus or attention. Okay, so looking at this study of sleep deprivation versus blood alcohol concentration, basically the idea here is you had a study. Condition 1, your kept awake, so sleep deprivation. Condition 2 is increasing the blood alcohol concentration. And then you're testing basically how well they can do cognitively in these little hand-eye coordination tests. So you can kind of see the effects of sleep deprivation in that way. So the idea of these key findings, and you have to know these numbers, the equivalent of a blood alcohol concentration of 0.05 was equal to 17 hours of sleep deprivation. 24 hours of sleep deprivation, so i.e. like a whole day, was equal to a blood alcohol concentration of 0.1, which is obviously double the limit. The idea here is to emphasize this idea that when you think about how alcohol can influence someone who's driving, let's say, it's pretty bad, right? Like if you think about, this person has a blood alcohol concentration of 0.1. If they said, okay, should I go get in the car and drive now? You would say, no, that's foolish. You could kill someone, right? Whereas if someone has been sleep deprived for a while, if they said, okay, I'm going to get in the car now, you'd probably say, okay, or like if you think about it yourself, like if you're out and you have, a couple of drinks, you might say, okay, I'm not going to get in the car because it's quite dangerous, right? But if you, have to drive to work, and you are quite sleep deprived from the past week, generally you won't think like, oh, I'm really tired, I'm not going to drive. But the idea with this is that being sleep deprived can be as bad as having, your blood alcohol concentration at the highest limit or even worse. So it's this idea of understanding just how badly sleep deprivation can actually impact you in terms of your cognitive and your behavioral sort of functioning. So yeah, it's just an important thing to be able to understand these numbers.